October 28, 1571, a 19-year-old woman stepped toward an altar in the fortress church of Alexandrovskaya Sloboda, unaware that she carried death inside her body. Marfa Sobakina had won the hand of the most dangerous man in Russia, Ivan IV, a Tsar whose previous 2 wives had died under circumstances that whispered of poison and conspiracy. What should have been her triumph, the culmination of a bride show that began with 2,000 candidates and ended with her alone, became instead a countdown to catastrophe. 15 days. That was all the time she had left. And when she died, the man who called himself protector of all Russia would unleash a vengeance so terrible that chronicles would struggle to capture its full horror. This is the story of how a mother's desperate love became an empire's funeral bell, and how one wedding night birthed a monster that would drown Moscow in suspicion and blood. The selection process had been ruthless. From the forests near the White Sea to the plains beyond the Volga, imperial envoys had summoned every eligible maiden of noble or merchant blood to stand before the Tsar's physicians and astrologers. 2,000 hopefuls were inspected with clinical precision, their bodies examined for signs of fertility, their lineage traced for potential treachery, their birth charts studied for cosmic favor. Stage by stage, the field narrowed. 2,000 became 24, 24 became 12, and from that final dozen, Ivan chose Marfa, daughter of Vasily Sobakin, a wealthy merchant from Novgorod whose fortune had elevated his family into the dangerous orbit of power. She was, by all accounts, radiant. Her hair gleamed like wheat in summer sunlight. Her eyes held a clarity that seemed to promise peace to a ruler who had known only turmoil. Imperial physicians declared her the strongest of all candidates, the woman most likely to bear the robust heirs that Ivan's crumbling dynasty desperately needed. But even as preparations for the wedding gathered momentum, something was terribly wrong. Within days of her selection, Marfa began to fade. Attendants noticed how she struggled to stand during fittings for her bridal gown, how color drained from her cheeks, how her hands trembled when she reached for a cup of water. The physicians prescribed herbs and prayers, ancient remedies that had sustained Russian courts for generations, but nothing slowed her decline. Some whispered of exhaustion from ceremonial duties. Others, more darkly, spoke of curses laid by jealous rivals or boyard families who resented a merchantess' daughter ascending to the throne. No one, not the most learned doctor in Moscow, could diagnose what was consuming her from within. And so the wedding proceeded, because dynasties could not wait for mysteries to resolve themselves, because Ivan needed an heir more than he needed a healthy bride, because the machinery of imperial power, once set in motion, ground forward regardless of the bodies it crushed beneath its wheels. The ceremony itself became a theater of omens. Marfa, buried beneath layers of crimson brocade and jeweled vestments that weighed nearly as much as she did, swayed at the altar. Twice she collapsed, her legs buckling as priests chanted prayers and incense smoke coiled through the vaulted chapel. Those close enough to see her face later reported something that haunted them for years afterward. Her pupils were unnaturally wide, her skin slick with perspiration despite the autumn chill, her entire body seized by tremors that no amount of ceremonial composure could hide. The attending physicians exchanged glances heavy with professional dread. They recognized the signs of something catastrophic unfolding inside her, but in an age before toxicology or blood tests, they had no words for what they were witnessing. Ivan himself, towering in his ceremonial silks, watched his third bride struggle to remain conscious and felt the old familiar rage beginning to kindle in his chest. Someone, his instincts screamed, had done this deliberately. Someone had poisoned what belonged to him. The feast that should have lasted until dawn collapsed before midnight, untouched dishes of roasted swan and honeyed cakes growing cold as Marfa was carried to the bridal chambers and Ivan followed his wedding night transformed into a death vigil that would shape the next decade of Russian history. If you're gripped by this story of how imperial medicine could become an instrument of tragedy, hit that subscribe button now, because what we're about to uncover gets darker still. The secrets buried in those bridal chambers have been waiting for centuries to be told, and you won't want to miss what happened in the 15 days that followed. The bridal apartments had been prepared with extravagant care. Persian carpets layered thick over heated floors, braziers glowing with coals to ward off October's bite. Silk hangings embroidered with scenes of fertility and abundance draped across every wall. The air itself seemed weighted with expectation, heavy with incense meant to kindle desire and ensure conception. But desire had no place in that room. Ivan entered to find his bride barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored, her skin taking on a waxy translucence that physicians recognized as the harbinger of death. For 2 weeks, the court held its breath. The Tsar, refusing to leave Marfa's side for more than brief intervals, swung between anguished prayer and furious interrogation. He summoned every healer within reach, demanding explanations, threatening executions if they could not save her. They brought herbs from distant monasteries, holy water blessed by metropolitans, amulets inscribed with protective verses, but nothing touched whatever force was destroying her from within. Servants whispered of witchcraft. Boyars muttered about divine punishment for Ivan's crimes. And somewhere in Novgorod, if the later accounts are true, Marfa's mother clutched a secret that would soon cost dozens of lives. November 13, 1571. 15 days after her wedding, Marfa Sobakina died in the Tsar's arms. Whether she spoke any final words is lost to history. But later, chroniclers imagined her whispering forgiveness for sins not her own, absolution for a mother who had only tried to help. Ivan's grief lasted perhaps an hour before it calcified into something far more dangerous. Convinced that treachery had stolen his bride, that hidden enemies had murdered the woman who represented his last hope for dynastic stability, he unleashed what contemporaries described as a storm of vengeance unlike anything Moscow had witnessed even in those blood-soaked years. 20 people were arrested within days. Attendants who had prepared Marfa's food, physicians who had examined her before the wedding, distant relatives whose only crime was proximity to tragedy. The interrogations were savage. Torture chambers beneath the Kremlin echoed with screams as investigators demanded confessions about forbidden potions and dark sorcery. And eventually, through methods we can only imagine, they extracted the story that would shape how history remembered Marfa's death. The tale that emerged, whether truth or fiction wrung from broken bodies, was almost unbearably tragic. Marfa's mother, anxious about her daughter's fertility, had turned to an old remedy whispered about in merchant households and peasant cottages alike. Mercury, that mysterious liquid metal prized throughout Europe for its supposed medicinal properties, was believed to stimulate conception and ensure healthy pregnancies. Alchemists and healers of the 16th century prescribed it for everything from skin diseases to infertility, unaware that they were administering one of nature's most insidious poisons. A loving mother, desperate to secure her daughter's success in the most important role of her life, had measured out what she believed was medicine and created instead a death sentence. By the time this confession surfaced, if it ever truly did, the executioner had already been busy. Mikhail Tchaikovsky, brother of Ivan's second wife, was dragged to Red Square and impaled alive before thousands of witnesses, his agony stretching across 3 hours as a warning to anyone who might threaten the Tsar's household. Vasily Sobakin, Marfa's father, was spared execution only to be exiled to a distant monastery where he could mourn alone. His sons were less fortunate. Charges of witchcraft and all-purpose accusation that covered everything from political rivalry to bad luck sent them to the scaffold. The full scope of Ivan's vengeance may never be known. Records from that period are fragmentary, some deliberately destroyed, others lost to fire and conquest. But the pattern was clear. A grief-maddened Tsar had decided that Marfa's death was murder, and he would extract payment in blood regardless of actual guilt. The episode seemed to confirm every paranoid instinct Ivan possessed. If enemies could strike at him in his own bridal chamber, poisoned a woman chosen through the most elaborate selection process in Russian history, then nowhere was safe and no one could be trusted. The years that followed saw massacres in Novgorod, purges of boyar families, a reign of terror that historians would struggle to fully document. And at the heart of it all, if you believed the chronicles, was a mother's gift given in love and received as death. In 2009, forensic anthropologists examined remains attributed to Marfa Sobakina, applying modern science to a 400-year-old mystery. Testing revealed elevated levels of mercury in the bones, lending credibility to the old stories about a poisoned remedy. A facial reconstruction showed delicate features, a young woman of ethereal beauty whose serene expression in death betrayed nothing of her final agonies. The contrast between that peaceful image and the chaos her death unleashed is almost too painful to contemplate. 15 days from wedding to funeral, 20 lives or more extinguished in vengeance, an empire's descent into paranoia and brutality, all perhaps because a merchant's wife tried to help her daughter conceive an heir. The story of Marfa Sobakina reminds us that history's darkest moments often turn on the smallest hinges, a potion mixed in secret, a mother's desperate hope transformed into a Tsar's murderous rage. The wedding night that should have secured a dynasty instead unleashed forces that would reshape Russia for decades, and somewhere beneath the cathedrals of Moscow, in graves marked and unmarked, lie the bodies of those who paid for a tragedy they could neither prevent nor understand. What secrets, one wonders, still sleep in the sealed records of other royal households, waiting for someone brave enough to disturb them? In the comments below, tell us what haunts you most about this story. Was it the image of Marfa collapsing at her own wedding, the horror of a mother realizing her gift had become poison, or the knowledge that 20 innocent people died for a crime that may have been nothing more than medical ignorance? And which queen or princess should we investigate next? Your voice could guide us to the next dark chapter of history that the world has tried to forget.